Good morning, Higher Politics students. Today we're going to continue with our Higher Politics essay writing. And we're going to continue with the essay that I gave you last lesson, which is to evaluate the effectiveness of traditional grassroots campaign strategies. This is a 12-mark essay. So today our focus is going to be on how you add analysis to your Higher Politics essays. Let's return to the slide that we looked at last time, which shows the breakdown of marks, the mark allocations for different parts of your essay. So last lesson we looked at knowledge, and we looked at how you can gain knowledge through using point, explain, example. Today our focus is to be looking at the 6 marks for analysis in a 20-mark essay, how you would gain those, or if it was a 12-mark essay, how to gain 4 marks for analysis. So how do you get a mark for analysis? Well, we're going to be looking at campaign strategies, and what you have to do is look at a campaign strategy that you have described, and then you would have to think about what you could say about its effectiveness. So the skills we're going to be using are your thinking skills. We're also going to be using communication skills, because you have to then communicate your ideas in sentences using particular words. So our success criteria today will be to make an analytical statement saying if a campaign method is good or successful or limited, and then support the analytical statement with supporting evidence. We're also going to try and make sure that our analytical statement is using keywords or statements, and make sure that our analytical statements are relevant to the questions. So these are the things that we're going to be learning how to do. Last lesson I showed you the 2019 marking scheme, because what the example given in the 2019 marking scheme talks first of all about how you get your knowledge. So we looked at this last lesson and we were looking at what they said about leaflets. So if you remember, this was first of all the point that you would get a mark for, and then you would develop that point with an explanation and get a 2nd mark, and then you would get a 3rd mark for putting in an example. Now, returning to the same marking scheme, what we're looking at this time is how you get an analysis mark. And what they have done in the marking scheme here is given us an example of how you would get a straightforward piece of analysis by making an analytical statement, and then you get a 2nd mark if you put in some supporting evidence. So let's have a look at that in a little bit more detail. So I've copied it out on the slide here. Your first point, your first mark, analytical mark then, is by putting in something about the use of leaflets. So it's saying it could be argued that the use of leaflets can be important at a local level, as it allows parties to tailor a message to a geographical area. However, social media also allows messages to be tailored to a specific group of voters within these areas, and this suggests social media will have a greater impact on support. Now, for that first bit there, you would get 1 mark. But then if you look further on, they're giving some supporting evidence. For example, Facebook's strategy of promoting Jeremy Corbyn and his policies successfully targeted and engaged young voters who had not voted in a general election in such large numbers since 1992. This was widely seen to be a significant factor in Labour's unexpectedly good performance. So there you get your 2nd mark for bringing in some supporting evidence. Now let's look at some more examples now, but in these examples we're going to look at and see the particular words or phrases that are used which would indicate to the examiner that you are making an analytical point. So one way, which is like the example we've just seen, is by starting with the words "it could be argued that." It's a fairly straightforward way of bringing in an analytical point. Other ways, therefore, this was effective because, this is a good campaign method because, whilst this might be a good campaign method, a drawback would be, so looking at the negative effect. And then another one, whilst canvassing on its own will not win an election, combined with, and then you put in another reason. This was seen as significant in the Conservative victory of 2019. The use of modern technology was a huge success because this could have a negative effect on a party's success because. So along with something else, gave the SNP an advantage. Now what we're seeing here is you're leading the examiner to see that you are making some sort of a judgment about an election campaign method, whether it's a good or bad, or whether on its own or combined with something else it was effective. And some of the really important words are we're saying something's good, or effective, or successful, a drawback, a benefit, a negative effect. Now it's a good idea for you to copy down some of these words because you may need them later when you're making your own analytical statements. So pause the video here and make a note of a few of these phrases. So here's some more analytical statements, some examples for you. This kind of campaigning is successful because it's rooted in people's concerns: houses, wages, transport. It engages with non-voters and swing voters, middle-class voters and working-class voters. Now this analytical statement that I've copied down here for you was in an article that you've read earlier in your note making when you were doing some studying about canvassing, methods of canvassing. So that I've just lifted from an article that you've already got in your notes. Here's a second one. A drawback to digital campaigns is that there are no online rules for adverts. Online content could be misleading or fake. Now here again, that's an analytical statement. Again, I've not made it up myself. I've copied it from an article that you read earlier. The third one, this time, is from the Panorama video that you watched, and I've taken what the message in that Panorama video was, and I've turned it into an analytical statement. So TV broadcasts can benefit political campaigns, but when they get it wrong, it can severely damage them. Take, for example, Theresa May, who came over as scripted, monotonous and boring in the 2017 campaign. Now, all of these statements will get you 1 mark for making a straightforward statement. Now, if you wish, you can then get a 2nd mark by putting further supporting evidence. Right, let's move on to your task now. What I'd like you to do is go back to the 3 paragraphs that you wrote last lesson, where you made a point, explain, example. Now, each of those were talking about a different grassroots method of campaigning, but this time, what I'd like you to do is add to that paragraph an analytical statement. Now, you can use notes from this video, if you like, or go back to the notes that you've made earlier to help you make your analytical statements. Now this was a task from last lesson. You were given all of these jumbled up statements here about grassroots campaigns, and you had to make them into point, explain, example. And your 3 paragraphs that you wrote were one on databases, one was on battle buses, and one was on canvassing. So you're expected now to make an analytical statement on each of these 3 methods of campaigning. Now, remembering your success criteria, you've got to say whether that method of campaigning was good, successful, limited. You can use some supporting evidence. You should use the keywords or statements that I gave you earlier. And lastly, you make sure that it is relevant to the question. So have a go at doing these. Share them with myself or Mrs. Nicol on the Teams page. If you get stuck, please ask us for help. Watch this video again so that you're absolutely sure what's expected of you, and good luck. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.